In American society, money is a taboo topic. We're taught at a young age it's improper to talk about it, but we're also bombarded with messages about the power and importance of money in our everyday lives. And by not talking about it, we miss out on the skills and lessons we need to effectively understand and financially plan. That changes today. Welcome to Money Tales. Hosted by Sandy Brager and Cami Doder, Money Tales brings more than 35 years of combined professional experience in personal finance to demystify money and demonstrate what it's like to speak openly about personal financial matters. Join us each episode as they interview modern-day movers and shakers about how money decisions intertwine with their daily lives in order to give you better insight into productive financial conversations. Subscribe today and register for our blog Fathom at aspiriant.com/podcasts to increase your money mojo. And now, here's Cami and Sandy.
This episode is about breaking generational patterns through conscious choice. Jamie Yuenger is our guest this week on Money Tales. At 17, Jamie explicitly told her mother not to buy her a car because the family couldn't afford it, yet came home to find one in the garage anyway. When she pressed about insurance, her mother assured her it was covered. But after the car was totaled in an accident, Jamie discovered the insurance had been canceled. Next, Jamie was told she'd have to stay home from school to pay back the damages. In that pivotal moment, just 2 months before starting college, Jamie made a defining choice. Despite her fear of confronting her mother, her fear of not escaping the cycle of financial chaos was greater. As the first person in her family to attend college, she refused to let her mother's financial decisions derail her future, demonstrating how breaking free from inherited patterns sometimes requires the courage to choose your own path. Let me tell you more about Jamie. She's the founder and CEO of StoryKeep, the premier legacy media company serving ultra-high net worth families globally. With a background in folklore and a deep passion for human stories, Jamie leads a creative team that produces bespoke films and private podcasts to preserve family history, values, and legacy. Her work is rooted in the belief that storytelling is a powerful bridge across generations, fostering connection, belonging, and meaning. Jamie speaks internationally on the role of narrative in wealth transfer and family resilience.
Here are 3 key money topics Jamie hits on in this conversation. First, how observing her mother's tendency to overspend during her childhood shaped Jamie's money behaviors going into adulthood. Second, the danger of connecting net worth to self-worth. As a new entrepreneur, Jamie discovered how easily she tied personal value to business success, especially when clients rejected her proposals. Learning to separate self-worth from financial outcomes through curiosity led to clear thinking as a business owner. And third, money conversations require intentional systems and partnerships. When Jamie's husband joined her business, they grappled with questions about compensation and equity that affected both their company and their marriage. Hiring a CFO became a crucial way to create objective financial systems that both partners could understand, ultimately strengthening their professional and personal relationships. Now it's our pleasure to bring you Jamie Yuenger's Money Tales.
Welcome to the Money Tales podcast. I'm Cami Doder.
And I'm Sandy Brager. Cami, we have discussed that in past months, many of our clients have asked questions and been curious about moving out of the United States. I've been doing some research for a couple related to how best to move assets out of the United States. They want to remain here, but they want to keep some money outside of the US just for good diversification purposes. It's not that easy to do. Everyone has this idea that you could just open up a Swiss bank account and everything will be fine. Things have changed and it's really difficult to open a true Swiss bank account these days. The United States has put a lot of different rules and regulations in place. If you keep money outside of the United States, any financial asset actually, that's greater than 10,000 US dollars, then you fall into a situation where you need to start reporting those assets. If you have even more financial assets outside of the United States, there's another form you have to file. And the foreign financial services company has to file a similar report as well. In the past, people like to open those Swiss bank accounts to have this anonymous money that no one really knew about, those days are over. If someone wanted to truly open a Swiss bank account, they could do it through a US registered investment advisor that's affiliated with a Swiss private bank. That's the easiest way to do it. It is possible to open up checking accounts outside of the United States while you are still residing in the United States, but it is also difficult to do. Not only are there these reporting requirements to be aware of, but if you keep investments outside of the United States and those investments throw off passive income, dividends and interest, and they're organized as part of a fund, think about a mutual fund or exchange traded fund, then that triggers some negative income tax ramifications. Instead of being taxed at favorable capital gains rates or dividend rates as you would pay if that money was parked and invested in the US, you actually have to pay tax on that income at ordinary income tax rates. I'm just giving you an overview. This is by no means a laundry list of everything you need to be aware of, but there is a lot to be aware of when you are a US citizen living in the US, keeping money abroad. A lot of these rules also apply if you are a US citizen living abroad. We've talked in the past about how you have to pay tax on your global income as a US citizen, regardless of where you live. There's some estate planning opportunities and considerations in there too. So what seemed like a really simple wondering, can I just park some of my money outside of the US, actually has a lot of thorny planning related to it, which is pretty fun from my seat to navigate through.
I love it. Of the investments that clients talk with you about, is it truly just cash? Is there anything consistently you're hearing, a type of asset that clients want to hold offshore?
It just sort of depends. In some cases, an emotional reaction of maybe I just need a plan B just to make sure I have money that I can access.
It's not gold or anything.
It's interesting that you say that because of those negative tax ramifications that I was mentioning about keeping investments outside of the United States, some people do choose to keep currencies and gold because they don't generate any income while you're holding them. Some people are trying to move out of the United States as well as move assets. And there are different countries that offer investment migration where you make an investment in that country in exchange for the ability to have residency there and or the ability to become a citizen of that country.
That is very fascinating.
It gets complicated quickly.
It does get complicated. Well, speaking of international, it's my opportunity to welcome our guest today, Jamie Yuenger. It's fabulous to be talking with you on Money Tales.
Welcome, Jamie.
Thank you for having me. It's so interesting hearing you two talk about this because I've lived a lot of the complications that you've been talking about in my own special way, learning what I can and can't do being an American living in the Netherlands, now a dual citizen. So I'm both Dutch and American as of about 4 or 5 months ago.
Oh, that's exciting.
It's very exciting, but all about the foreign tax credits and reporting foreign income, having foreign bank accounts, which I have, of course. So it's very real.
Jamie, that's a lot. And you've already started introducing yourself, which is wonderful. Would you share a little bit more about yourself and also a couple pivotal moments that have taken place in your life that have really impacted who you are today?
Well, I'll start by saying I'm a mother, first and foremost, in a lot of ways.
Very pivotal.
Especially having a 5-year-old. She just learned to bike without her side wheels. If either of you or listeners have had that experience of watching your own child pedal on their own, it's really thrilling.
Magical.
Proudest moment.
Yeah. It's a constant reminder of all the development that we're still capable of as adults. I'm American, was born in Colorado, moved around quite a bit. My dad had been in the military, but then later worked for the government. So I lived in Louisiana, Alabama, Wisconsin, and later grew up in my 20s and 30s in New York City. Professionally, I was always really interested in humans, human expression, people, why they were the way they were, leaning towards interest in psychology and those kinds of themes, and ultimately studied documentary. And in 2010, when I was living in New York City, not with any grand plans, but with a strong vision, but not knowing where that was going to lead me, I started a company to document people's life stories and family histories. That was 15 years ago now.
How old were you then?
I was 28 years old when I did that. The last 15 years, I've run StoryKeep and worked over the last 7 or 8 years pretty much exclusively with multi-generational families, mostly enterprising, business owning families who want to document their stories, pass on their values, pass on their histories, honor loved ones. That's my work. And 3 or 4 years ago, my husband, who's Dutch, who is the reason why I now live in the Netherlands, he was a filmmaker in his own right before we met each other. He joined the company. So that turned a female founder company into a couple run company, which has been an interesting mirror of working with often family owned companies.
Now you really understand the complexities of it.
At least elements. I didn't, of course, know this at the time. We hardly ever know what my husband would call your signature stories are while they're happening to you when you're younger. But a really big part of the driver of my interest in story and truth and human expression was that when I was 9, my mom told me that I had been born from an affair and that the dad who was raising me wasn't my biological dad, and introduced me to my biological dad. So you're 9 years old and you're told this. She also told me at the time that she had made a pact with my dad who was raising me, her husband. The plan had been not to tell me, and that I needed to keep it a secret from him, from everyone, from my brother. You can imagine the trauma that imparts in a small soul. I lived between two worlds. One was I just told my fourth grade teacher what had happened because I thought, I'm going to tell her I can't live with this. But I also did live in secrecy. I never talked to my dad who raised me about it. I much later in my life talked to my brother about it.
You never have talked to your dad about it as a kid?
My dad who raised me, no. A few years later, I ended up meeting and starting to have a relationship with my biological dad. There was a lot of secrecy and what is the real story and who am I and what's the identity and what's my family unit and do I belong? Subconscious and conscious questions happening, which makes a lot of sense of how I ended up driving towards this interest in what is family, what is belonging, what are the stories that we tell ourselves, what is the true narrative, who owns the narrative, those questions that undergird my own personal interest in the work that I do today. When I was 18, I met my biological grandmother, so the mom of the dad that I later met. Her whole family line, both the maternal and paternal lines, had come from Norway and Denmark. Of course, I wouldn't have known that had I never been told the truth of my paternity. When I met her, she was really this Scandinavian American older woman in southwestern Wisconsin making lefse, which is a Scandinavian potato pancake. She showed me these artifacts that my ancestors had brought over from Norway and Denmark when they immigrated to the United States. It was a hugely powerful impression on me. Not only this is who my dad is, but when you're 18, you really start to understand the line of your heritage. I actually majored in Scandinavian studies in college. Had to learn Norwegian. I also studied folklore, which is the study of traditional cultures through dance and music and storytelling. That's what ultimately led me to study documentary, later radio journalism, and then ultimately founding my company, StoryKeep.
This whole time, the father who raised you did not know that you knew this secret.
The truth of the matter is I don't know, but I think he knew on some level, but it was never raised with me.
It wasn't out in the open.
It became at a certain point later in my 20s that I knew that he knew, and he knew that I knew, and we never talked about it. When he was dying and he was really on his deathbed in a hospital, I saw him and I flew from New York City to where he was living. I had a moment without my brother or my mom in the room, and he was on oxygen and he had a tube down his throat so he couldn't talk. So it was perfect because I could tell him what I wanted to say. And all I said was, I hope you don't feel that I betrayed you. He kind of motioned for a piece of paper and a pencil, and in very chicken scratch writing, he wrote, "You are beautiful in all that you do." And that's the last thing he ever said to me. So I do feel that it was resolved on the level that I needed it to be resolved.
It's incredible. So Jamie, this was a family where just secrecy was part of it. We talk about that theme even with money. And I'm curious, how was money handled in your home and how did you connect with it when you were growing up?
This has been such a huge part of my personal journey and healing. And still, my mom, I think, in the pain and all that she was working with, one of her coping mechanisms was shopping. There was a lot of overconsumption, even though we were growing up in a middle class household. So I saw that a lot and it worried me, being the older child who was trying to keep it all together. Seeing that worried me. So I eschewed materialism for a long time, overly. I think it's why I leaned into less tangible things that felt more meaningful. I remember as a kid going through the grocery store line, and people who I went to high school with would be bagging groceries as their job there. And there was a time when we went through the line and my mom didn't have enough money to pay for the groceries and we had to put them all back.
Oh, how'd that make you feel?
I was devastated. I was mortified. I can just so clearly picture the scene. It's funny. Now I feel like I would expect a lot of people have had this experience in their life, but at the time it felt like I was the only one in the world that would have a nervousness when I would go to pay for something. I would be overly nervous about there not being enough money in an account to pay for something, to not relive that kind of embarrassment. That was probably when I was 13 or 14 years old or something along those lines. And then later, when I was about 17, it was common that people in my high school would get a car because you kind of needed to drive where we were to get around as a teenager. And I told my mom specifically, I don't want you to buy me a car. I couldn't afford to buy a car and I didn't want her to buy me a car because I knew they couldn't afford it. And I also was worried about her not having insurance on it. There was all this stuff that was happening. And I came home one day and there was a car in the garage and I looked at it. I walked into the house and my mom was there and she just acted like nothing had happened. She didn't say surprise or anything. I was like, what's with the car? She's like, yeah. And I said, but is there insurance on the car? And she said, yeah, there is.
You were savvy.
I had lived through a lot by that point. She said, yes, there is. Yes, there is. I had her show me or prove it in some way. Within a year, I got into a car accident. Everyone was fine, but my car was basically totaled. My mother was absolutely devastated about this. And I was like, yes, but we have insurance. She's like, no, we don't. I canceled the insurance. And I was like, oh. Her whole story about this was that I needed to pay this money back. There was no coverage. So it was just the amount for the other person's car. And it was a lot. And I don't know how I pulled it in me, but I was like, no, I am not staying here to pay this. I made myself clear. I said we needed insurance. I'm going to college. This was like 2 months before I was about to graduate. And I had done really well in school. I'd gotten into the University of Wisconsin, Madison. I was like, I am out of here. Nothing, nobody is going to hold me back. And it's definitely not going to be this. Money was 100% a big thing.
Jamie, that's huge that you had the courage to do that. I can only imagine how worked up you must have been on the inside of this was the one thing I didn't want to have happen. And here it is happening. How did you muster that courage?
I had a few other adults in my life. I think this is actually how I survived this particular upbringing. And I don't really mean to blame my parents. I think they had a lot of wounds that they hadn't had the opportunity to work through. But I sought out other adults who I could trust and who I could talk about things with. It wasn't as if I immediately said that to her. I think over the course of 2 or 3 days, I was part of a youth group. I had a relationship with my biological dad, which of course was complicated in this whole dynamic. I had done so much to prepare myself in order to have the agency to leave home. I was the first person in my family that went to college and I had gotten in and I had gotten into a good college. So I was like, I don't know. I did all this work. I'm going to go now. I was so close. I was like 2 months away. There's a great quote. It came up recently. You can stay afraid until the other possibility of what you could lose becomes more insecure. I was afraid of talking to my mom, but I was more afraid of not leaving home and going to college. It outweighed the fear.
How did this impact you as a growing adult as you were moving into your own independence when you were off at school, choosing what you were going to study, how you were going to apply yourself to a career? How did that all come together?
I have always been someone, for good or for bad, that pretty much followed my heart, which meant I didn't do a study that would get me a good job. I didn't think about it like that. I really thought about what I was interested in, what really lit me up. I had a roommate in college. I remember she was studying engineering and talking about what job she wanted. And to me, from my skill set and interest, I was like, who would ever want to do that? And her answer to that was, well, I need to get a job. And she had this whole long plan. And I was just really interested in exploring what interested me. And what interested me was humans, human expression, culture, what it means to belong, what it means to be in a group, how we pass on wisdom, skills, anthropology in a lot of ways, psychology. It led me down that path from a money perspective. It wasn't that I wanted to go out and make tons of money, but I was very careful about keeping track of things. I knew how to balance a checkbook.
You didn't want to run out of money when you were paying for something.
I didn't want to run out of money. So I don't know if you've seen this style. It's common sort of in Guatemala, Costa Rica. There's crocheted, colorful, you can get them in wallets and different shapes. And I had this wallet that was multicolored and it had these peace people on it. What was in there was this little strip of white cardboard, and it was every bill I had for the month. And then every single time I would ever spend like any money, 15 cents, on whatever, like gum, I would write it in there and I would really keep track of everything. And I kept that with me for the first few years living in New York City. And when I first started, I was waitressing in New York, and you live by cash, basically. So I was really, really adamant about knowing where my stuff was.
It's interesting, Jamie, coming from your background and that you were focused on the expense, but not on the revenue side. There's a lot of people who struggle on that, coming from a background where there was maybe overspending and there's a scarcity and clinging to everything, and also then a desire to make money in any form or fashion. A lot of people would have to work through, I want to follow things that give me purpose. So I'm just curious, what is it that helped you be that person? Was it just innate? Were you inspired to follow and pursue things that lit you up?
I don't think I knew this for a long time, but I'm really realizing that I'm part of a sort of generational healing in my own ancestral line. A lot of the women and men who came before, who immigrated to the United States, who did the farming and did all of these things, there's just a lot of pain and a lot of surviving. I happen to be in the line of my family and my generations that I'm the person who's breaking from that. I don't want to live like that anymore. It's not helping them. They're mostly dead and gone. And the people who are still alive, they're stuck in that story. Am I doing anyone any good other than to truly follow my own life's design and be of value also to other people in doing that? Huge, true value. But I can only do that if I stay with what I'm here to do. I truly believe if you can feel that power, then you do offer something of great value. And then you can look at, let's actually generate revenue here because it makes sense, because I'm giving something that has great value. And then it comes back naturally.
I'm curious, Jamie, with what you just shared, are there times now in your life where you get rocked by money?
Oh, yeah. The kinks are getting worked out slowly but surely. It's interesting because in the early days of the company, generally we put a proposal together for a family or a founder to say, okay, this is what your project will be. And it's usually a custom quote. We don't have projects people choose from on a shelf. It's a very custom thing. So it's very bespoke, and you're in a relationship with this person, and then you put something in front of them to consider. You can easily tie your self-worth to the yes or no to that. It's really tricky. I advise people not to tie your self-worth to that. There's sort of two things happening right there: is the mindset and the way you think about your own worth and your place in the world. And then there's also pipeline and organizing things and having systems as a business owner, like business development. So there's multiple things happening. But that would really, really rock me. Now, I think I try and I think I am improving and being much more curious when those things happen. It also comes from different mindful practices of, right, there's space between me and my reaction here. And what am I feeling right now? Okay. And feeling more curious about what's going on and also curious about what's happening with that person. Did they misunderstand what we were putting in front of them? Or can I do this differently next time? Or what am I learning in this moment from how this person responded? Before it was just, I'm not worthy. Oh no. And the ramifications of not having that project come through from a financial perspective. So I don't know if it rocks me as much anymore, but it wasn't that long ago that it did rock me.
It sounds like you acknowledged it, you addressed it with your curiosity, and were able to make the pivot as you got more experienced with the joys of being a business owner too, and understanding that there are expenses that need to be covered.
I was talking to my husband about this actually leading up to talking to you too. And we were talking about this really big connection between money and sense of worth that gets connected in our minds and in our society. So it makes sense that when you have less money, you could feel less worthy, or if you're not given money for whatever you're doing or not enough or whatever is going on in your mind about it, that you tie worth to that because there is sort of a relationship between those two things on one level. And it's the undoing of that that I feel like almost that's what's so empowering and then really helps you think more clearly as a business owner about how to do your job and be of value when you don't get tied into that unhelpful narrative.
Jamie, you brought up your husband. So I want to go to both of your decision to have him join the business. So now you're concentrating your energy, your assets in one thing. And I'm curious how those conversations went and how you two talk about money with regards to the business and life.
It's always tricky when there's a founder and then someone joins, and then you put your relationship in the mix of that. It felt pretty tricky in the beginning, just from a logistical standpoint, because he had been doing executive coaching and working and doing trainings of public speaking. And this is something our client families talk about a lot. How should someone be compensated? How do you decide on those numbers? And how do you do that when you're the wife and he's the husband and you're also sharing a household? It's complicated. We had many open discussions about it over and over and over again.
Just the two of you?
The two of us. And then to a certain degree, we have an advisory board of 7 people who we've had for the last 3 years. And that has created more space to have more objectivity around certain things. We haven't focused too much on how much Pete is paid or something like that, but thinking about equity and power in the relationship. It is our sole income. Pete does a little bit of coaching here and there on the side, but basically the company needs his full attention. So that's pretty much what's happening. The more that we've gotten into it, actually, the more leverage and the better it feels. I think it was the waiting in when you don't quite know what it's going to be and you're also not fully committed quite yet. That was the most complicated time because I sort of felt like, well, I don't know if we want to tell the whole world that you're joining and this is what's happening unless we really know this is what's happening. And are you really committed? And he needed to feel like, well, where's my place here? And is it just going to be added on or can this be transformed through us doing this together? And the answer was that it had to sort of transform, and how we approach it and how people experience us is better because of it. But we had to commit to that. And it was a process. We now have a CFO, but I was doing all of the money stuff before. I had all my systems that he was like, what is this? This is messy.
Why are you pulling this paper out of your wallet?
I had gone beyond that. I now was working in Excel.
I'm just kidding you.
To him, practically, it was like, what are these formulas? I don't know. It didn't make any sense to him. Quite frankly, until we hired a CFO, it still didn't make sense to him because it was my system. And I think that was actually a really important step that we took, not only for the company, but also for us as the leadership, that there was a third person who was organizing how the money could be seen and how we were keeping track of things in a way that he could also follow. They were sort of baby steps. Also, when he first joined, it was like, well, do we have enough money to pay you and me? And then, but are you working for free? Because that often happens too, where family members or owners don't necessarily get paid. If you're at a point in the company where you need to make investments, people who work for you might get paid, but sometimes you don't get paid. That's part of the risk. That was also a complicated question. It has gotten better and better, but it has not happened naturally. We had really had to work at it and to have difficult conversations at times. But I'm happy to say that we are in a good place with it.
I love how you describe it as wading into it and not just jumping into the deep end.
We jumped into the deep end romantically, and then we waded into the business part.
Good. The romantic stuff is a good one to just jump into.
Jamie, tell us, what's your next money conversation going to be and who's it going to be with?
The next money conversation will be with a client family of ours. They've done projects with us, and they're at a point where we can enter into sort of a long-term partnership with them and talking to them about what would it look like if we were to work with you on an annual basis, and what would be valuable to you, and what would the number be as a retainer, let's say, that would make sense for that value. It's a collaborative conversation with them about the value of what we do and what would make sense for them. It's totally new for us because we've been up to this point project-based when we work with people. And now we realize we're just like a long-term partner with certain families who are invested in using their story and using their history as a way to bind and teach and explore their families' connections. It's going to be interesting talking with them about it, talking to their family council. Cool for them, because if they want, they can make a longer term investment and thinking in a longer term way about it. And also for us as a business, it creates more stability in knowing that we're doing those projects and revenue that's coming in.
What an exciting next conversation to have. Not only is it stability, but you are about relationships, and to have this ongoing relationship with certain families will be just, I can tell, very much in line with who you are and what you're passionate about. Jamie, it's been incredible talking with you on Money Tales. Before we let you go, where's the best place for our listeners to find you?
If you go to storykeep.com, you can see all about the company and you can see some of our work.
Thanks again. These stories were incredible, and thanks for sharing with us on Money Tales.
My pleasure.
Thanks for listening to the Money Tales podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, share it with someone you think would benefit from listening, and leave us a review on your favorite podcasting platform. Your ratings and reviews help more people find our podcast. If you're inspired to gain clarity and peace of mind about financial matters, don't hesitate to reach out to our team at Aspiriant. Go to aspiriant.com/start a dialogue. Or you can email Sandy and me at podcasts@aspiriant.com. See you next time.